It's insulin resistance. We didn't just mystically have this disease come in, diabetes. It is because we have progressively moved away from what we're talking about, which is being in touch with your body and what your body should be eating, how it should be moving, how it should regenerate itself. And this is also interrelated with circadian clock, which is very important. The proper amount of sleep, going to bed at the right time, all these things, you just can't eliminate or take yourself out of the universe and adapt physically because it's not possible. It's too short a time. Maybe in 100 million years, we won't need sleep, but right now we do.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Graham Hetrick. He's my local coroner, and we're going to talk about life and death, and who better to learn from than a man who sees how we die, because how we live is how we die. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote comes from Naval Ravikant. Doctors won't make you healthy. Nutritionists won't make you slim. Teachers won't make you smart. Gurus won't make you calm. Mentors won't make you rich. Trainers won't make you fit. Ultimately, you have to take responsibility. Save yourself. Let's face it, no one else is going to save you, so you have to do it yourself. The problem is, many times we have the wrong information. Today, our guest is going to share some interesting thoughts on how we can live better lives. Before we get to that, last week's action step was to open a brokerage account so you can invest. How are you doing with this? Do you already have one? The stock market is going to be on sale. What better time to invest than when things are cheap? I'm not sure when that is, but be ready so when opportunity knocks, you can answer the door. When I was growing up, there was a show called Quincy M.E. He was the medical examiner who always solved the cases and did deep investigational work. I used to love that show. Today's guest is the real live version of Quincy. My friend Graham Hetrick is the local coroner, and he has a wealth of knowledge of how people live and how they die. He has his own TV series. It's called The Coroner. I Speak for the Dead. We've been having many in-depth conversations in person, and I thought I'd love to share a highlight of them with you. So we set up a time to chat a little bit and record and share those conversations. A little bit about Graham Hetrick. He says, "This is not my job, it's my calling." He was raised above a funeral home. Death has always been his companion. He's certified over 13,000 deaths, investigated approximately 600 homicides, and participated in over 3,000 autopsies since being elected coroner of Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, almost 30 years ago. He has a quote. English author P.G. Wodehouse wrote, "In death, there are no secrets. The secrets of the dead are revealed in what they leave behind, the scene of their demise down to the very condition of their bodies, both inside and outside, contain patterns that tell him a story." Let's meet our guests and find out the story. Welcome to Richer Soul, Graham Hetrick. It's great to have you join us today. And I'm excited about our conversation. But before we begin, we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I grew up over a funeral home, so it was sort of an unusual thing. I had this exposure to mortality and death very early on, and I didn't fully understand it. I did know that my father was not in charge of his own time. And it was a significant thing. And I thought this is just a horrible way to live because he was always on call. Now, remember, this was before pagers. Everything was a landline phone. So even if you wanted to go out to a restaurant, you'd have to get some little old lady to sit there by the phone. You'd have to have the phone number of the restaurant. And that's how you were on call. So it was very confining. One of the biggest things in change in life was a pager. And then from pagers, of course, now we have the smartphones and all the other apparatus to keep in touch all the time. Maybe too much so. So from that standpoint, I saw tremendous work ethic in my dad because essentially he was a small businessman and sort of like a servant at the same time, which was an interesting combination. And I remember later on studying servant leadership, and wow, it was my father. There are many times, actually, when I took over the business, I realized how many times there were people that he served that he knew he was never going to get paid, and it was outstanding dollars out there. And I just didn't do anything about it because he was always sensitive about that. Even to this day, after I, for a period of time, took over that funeral home. But when I sold it off, I had two choices too. It was one was to this conglomerate, and the other one was to my employees. But I knew my employees would do things such as Nathan Bittner, who took it over, and now it's 4 funeral homes. But he's never made a charge, and that was the agreement with me for anybody under the age of 13. Only expenses, but no charges from the funeral home. And that was what my father did for years and years. So the money side of things, it's sort of funny. I have been pretty lucky to accumulate wealth, and I've also had the appreciation of losing wealth. So it puts it all in perspective. I'm worried or concerned, or let's say I work towards success more than I do wealth. And that's a wholly different thing. You can have a teacher making $75,000 a year, and they love teaching. They're successful. If you can do what you love and love what you do, you're successful. And you have to understand, for instance, I love sculpting, and I've done forensic sculpting, that sort of stuff. And I don't have really a lot of time to do it right now, but it's something I love to do. But if I wanted to do that as an artist full time, I would have to look at the reality of such a thing. Or somebody says, well, I'm going to go into pottery. Well, okay. But you have to devise your lifestyle so that you can be wealth in what you do and the quality of your time rather than wealth in dollars. So I think I recognized that later on in life, because my first attempt was just to get away from anything that had to do with funeral homes and being on call. And the irony of that is that I ended up in 385th Military Police and 52nd CID. And every time we had a homicide, they'd say, well, let Hetrick handle that stuff. His old man's a funeral director. So I ultimately ended up being in a specific field named today medical legal death investigation. But in those days, it wasn't even a subsection of forensic science. So it's been an interesting journey in that way. The actual position of coroner that I have now was not a financial decision, because I'm making less money and I can't take out my retirement until I leave. And so it was a choice of, this is what I really want to do in this phase of my life. So money is always a balance between the quality of your time. I think quality of life is obviously, I remember a very close friend of mine who was very good at making money, was John Vartan. And many buildings in real estate around here still reflect his name. But I also remember sitting up late at night with John and him deciding what type of operation he would have, because he had cancer. And it was a decision not based on money or anything else. It was a decision on how long could he be with his kids. And he adapted in many ways, but John was very interesting, very successful. And he told me, he said, Graham, I've been in and out of 3 immigration camps over in Lebanon. He said, I've watched my father accumulate millions and then go down to nothing, and we're in a 10 again. He says, money doesn't impress me. Power does. And money helps power. And the power for what? Not more accumulation so much as to do things his way and to do what he liked to do. So he was never really impressed with money itself, because he had gained it and lost it many times. And that lesson I always learned. I took it with me from watching John. He wasn't impressed. His actual living style, other than some grandiose buildings and stuff like that, his living style was very basic, very basic. And frankly, after he was battling his illness for so long, he told me once, I'd give away every building I ever built if I'd be healthy.
You hit on so many of the topics that we talk about. And one is the importance of health, because without health, as you said, you're willing to give away billions for it. And too often we give up our health to make money, and there's not enough money to buy it back. And then you talk about time, which again, it's one of those things that you can never get back. It's something else that money just can't buy. I mean, going forward, you can buy time in the sense of, I can get somebody to help me or do things for me so that I don't have to spend my time going forward. But going backward, it's gone. It's never to be there again. And understanding those things, and I think putting them in perspective, is important. And I think for a lot of people, and I think you even said it yourself, the first chase is for money, because that's what we're all told. And once you get that, you realize, hey, I was chasing the wrong thing. And then you start to figure out the rest of it, which is what the show is all about, is helping people to understand up front. Don't chase the wrong thing. Be clear, be intentional, and know what you truly want from life before you go chasing it.
Well, I've had friends that are much wealthier than I, and they say, Grammy, you're a philosopher. You're not really all that good at making money. Now, I live well, but it's true. My life choices have not been specifically for money, but I've always been able to provide a decent lifestyle for myself, but at the same time, do things that I thought were two things that I love and things that help others. And to me, that's the concept. If I live my life totally in a concept of consuming for myself, I don't think you have value in your life. I have seen the difference. We were just doing some filming with addicts, and I came down after 1 week of filming of what was the most important area that helped you recover from substance abuse. And every one of them said, helping others. That's where they really turned a corner, when they understood service to others. And that was really a remarkable thing. It fits in with some studies that I have seen in the past about why we're even in the positions we're in today, why people are unhealthy. You see these very wealthy people, and many of them are very happy for multiple reasons, because with money, you have the ability to have people do things you don't like, and you can do the things you do like. That's a big deal. And then there's also the fact that you have the power to make changes the way you see they should be made. And that's a very powerful thing. But to actually be enamored with the accumulation of things, I think that's where we go south. And it's not just money that messes us up, because I've seen in media and in, of course, this TV shows and all this sort of stuff, people that become absolutely addicted to attention. And when they lose oh man, when people get enamored with having that attention, there's a real problem, because I've seen people lose. I did 3 seasons of the Coroner, I Speak for the Dead, and then ID, new people came in. They said, well, we're going to try another show. So they moved me over to Amazon Prime. And that was fine with me, because I thought, wow, I can do something that has a different format. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm doing work, just did a documentary on John Wilkes Booth and his autopsy, and that it really was him and how he got shot and all that. So that was really interesting to me, to go back into 1865. It wasn't all that profitable at all, but it was really interesting work. And I had worked with that producer before, and that'll be out in the spring in History Channel. But the documentary will have to have a good business model, because it'll be expensive. But on the other hand, I've turned down other work so I can do the documentary, because I think it's more important for this country to have a overall discussion about money. It's important for people here to have an overall discussion about addiction and the meaning of life. The reason, there was a study done by Bruce Alexander, and what he did is he put mice in a cage. He had food. He had male, female mice, and he had water and cocaine water. And I think about 2 weeks, all the mice are dead. So then the only thing he did was change the cage, and he put in like a Wally World for mice. and they could run around in tunnels and wheels and all this other stuff. Still had the men and women, mice and mice, male and female. And then he still had the cocaine water and regular water. And essentially, the population didn't get addicted because they had more meaning in what they were doing on a daily basis in their living. And I think this is our biggest problem today, whether it is being too enamored with money. So it's the love of money rather than seeing money as a tool. I can't do something like a $3.5 million documentary unless I have a business plan. And so that's what we're working on now. And it seems to be coming together pretty good. But the people that back something like that, they want to see something at the end of the line for them. So you have to know what you're doing. You have to have good showrunners that can control expenses and that type of thing. There's practicality to it, but I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it for the project. Okay.
And it's interesting you brought up that study with the mice, and I think we've talked about that before. And the same thing, I think, happened in Vietnam. The soldiers were all over there, and many of them were using drugs. And yet when they came home, the majority, I think the number was 90%, immediately stopped using drugs. And so I know there's a big controversy now within the country. People are talking about addiction. They're blaming it on the drugs, but I don't think the drugs are the underlying cause. And I know you are making a documentary on this, right? American Addiction. So can you kind of elaborate on that concept?
Well, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. And this is what I discovered when I read patterns every day of how people die. I'll probably go in today and write 1 or 2 people out on fentanyl deaths. I'll just review the cases and sign them out because of the toxicology reports. But it's not just that pattern. It's not just what was in their blood. It's what was in their life and how they were living and what kind of concept they had. See, I see life as a gift because every day I can't ignore mortality because that's what I work with. So I see it as a real gift. If you get up that day, you're a lucky person. I mean, I was struck the other day when I heard about Rush Limbaugh having stage 4 metastasized lung cancer. So the prognosis there is horrible. He's very likely not going to be with us for a long period of time. And I hope it's opposite. But here's a guy that had just signed a contract for, I don't know, $200 million or something, 4-year contract, $300 million. And he has been a very important voice in the conservative field. And he actually was the one that brought radio back, because there was no such thing as talk radio. It was just some disc jockeys spinning some records. And he brought all that back. So here he is at the pinnacle, not that old as far as I'm concerned. I think he's 65, 66. And yet, what does it mean? And if you live a good life, you're going to have a good death too. I really think that because, believe me, I'm at an age where I'm not worried about 20-year guarantee on the roof. You know, it's going to be somebody else's problem and not mine. And so, in a way, that's relieving. But on the other hand, it makes you more reflective and conscious of what you're doing now and what you have done in the past. So it does make you reflective as what is the value of everything you're doing now. And
starting the day with gratitude is probably an important thing, and it's a way to kind of shape the rest of your day. Today was a rare morning. I had to go to an event downtown, so I never drive in rush hour traffic, but today I had to. And it's just funny watching people like swerving in and out and chasing things. I'm like, could you not have left 5 minutes earlier and had a calm, peaceful drive to work? But it's also just remembering, I mean, I'm always grateful for hot water. I happen to love it. And grateful, you don't think about it until the heat goes out. You're not grateful for the fact that you're living in this perfectly climate-controlled environment. And if you look back, I mean, 100 years ago, this was not the norm. This is not something that's been there throughout human history. This is a very, very small time in history where we've had this, and especially air conditioning. I mean, central air is probably only about 50 plus years ago that it became the norm for everybody. I know I didn't grow up with it, and that's why I'm eternally grateful for when we have it. It just makes our life much, much easier. In spite of all this greatness, though, we're still stuck with this addiction problem. So what are you exploring in your documentary, and what are you finding?
There's so many reasons why I think we're at the place we are right now. I don't see the world right now as very happy. It's because I think you were just talking about we always live in this 70-degree climate. I was studying a guy named Wim Hof, which I think I mentioned to you, who climbs Mount Kilimanjaro in a bathing suit and shoes and swims in the ice and all that. And the reason I was interested in it is because they did some peer-reviewed studies on this guy, and they realized he could control his autonomic nervous system. So even this morning, when I got up, I did a breathing exercise for about 15 minutes. And it's a very specific method that he uses. It makes you more basic than acidic, number one. So that's a good thing. It reduces inflammation within your body. But it certainly awakens the mind because you superoxygenate yourself. Then you hold breath in between these cycles of breathing. And sometimes I hold it up to almost 3 minutes. And when I started out, it was like 89 seconds, So it's an interesting thing from that point of view. But what he teaches you to do is run around in your autonomic nervous system and your brain stem and your more primal brain and say, you can control this. You don't need to breathe because we just oxygenated you. So just don't breathe for a while. And you're working on it, and the adrenaline doesn't come out and say, you need oxygen. And you learn to control this for longer and longer periods of time. Well, that essentially is meditation. That is essentially being able to control both the mind and body. And it's done by breathing. And breathing is a technique embedded in all meditation, all religions, And so it's yoga would be an example of that, breath of fire and that type of thing. But again, something I do. But that evens you out. You talk about that person in the traffic early in the morning, they're in the traffic, they're already getting tense about getting to work. We felt more interconnected in the past because we lived more in our awareness than we have in our subconscious. And this is a very Freudian, and not Freudian, but a Jungian thing, in that our subconscious is built of all of our history. All those times you had those negative events and those positive events, but you're looking at reality, the here and now, through this history. And that's not necessarily reality. You have to be able to make yourself conscious enough of what's going on. And that's what that breathing does. Because you're saying, well, wait a minute. emotionally, I feel like I need to breathe right now because this is always what I would have to do. Wow, but I don't. That's pretty cool. And then, wow, that's not 1 minute, it's 2 minutes now that I'm not breathing. And you just go through this. And it also, the other thing I found out from that is I can control my core body temperature. This morning I took, and it is cold. This is well water out here. And I did a 5-minute cold shower this morning. And again, it's breathing, but it's more than that. It's sort of like rattling back to that primal brain, saying, no, this is okay. It's okay. It's cold, but it's okay. And that allows you to get into awareness or what the true reality is when you're going through situations, either emotional or in business stress and everything else. So it's staying and analyzing the true reality, I think, calms you down. But the other thing is it's sort of a biocentrism. Everything we do is connected to everything else that's here. Everything else. One day I was jogging down this lane here, and I didn't really want to do the jog. It was more of a jog walk, but my dog needed to go out. So we have like a 2-mile stretch that we can walk through the woods and everything. And I'm starting to go down, warming up a little bit from body movement, but I'm looking up at the change in the leaves because it was just at the beginning where summer's over and that beautiful green is now sort of a yellowish green. And then from that change, I started thinking about the cycles of life. And then from the cycles of life, I started thinking about the fact that the trees are there pushing out oxygen to me, and I'm giving them carbon dioxide. And I was just intrigued with the intricacies of how everything is related to everything else in this world. And when you do that, and I think when you talked about when people had to use a pot-bellied stove, there we go back to money again, because the guy who invented the pot-bellied stove was Ben Franklin. And he gave the patent away because he thought everybody should have heat in their house. That interesting. I mean, he had a lot of patents, but he certainly liked wealth. He was a very wealthy man. But on the other hand, he also was capable of sharing his genius with other people so that they could also succeed and lead better lives. And that, again, goes back to servant leadership. That interconnection that people had with nature. There was actually a study out that showed it was a study on the standing desk, right, and moving in your office, and it was interesting. They took a group that would use the standing desk, and another group that did not use a standing desk and sat a lot during the day or even in the evenings, but still worked out 3-4 times a week. And they found that the group that used the standing desk moved around, whether they worked out 3-4 times a week or not, were better off than the people that would go to the gym, work out an hour 3 times a week. But the rest of the time, they were very sedentary in what they were doing. And they weren't as healthy as the people that just moved more. And I think that's because if you take what a person had to do to survive 60 years ago, or even housework for a wife, they were doing the laundry, they were taking it out, they were hanging it up on the line. Now, there was a wringer washer. I remember the old wringer washer. And it was work. It was physical work. And when we don't feel as related to our bodies as we did then, and we don't feel related to meaning. And it's the lack of meaning, like Alexander's study, that lack of meaning wants us to get an outside source to make us happy. It's either going to be a pill, an anxiety drug, but what we're doing is we're playing with fire, because I believe that we're created beings. Now, not everybody does, but I just see the complexities and probabilities of everything. Even from the scientific standpoint, it's pretty improbable that in 14 billion years you could even come up with a DNA structure the way we have it. It's just too complex. So if you look at it from a probability standpoint, couldn't happen. So there's something going on here, and it is a creative source. And I think we are meant to create. That gives us meaning, and then that provides service, because if we create a better world rather than destroy things. So meaning is very important, but being connected with your body and then what you're doing is very important. And I just don't think we have that connection. They did. I mean, you'd be cutting wood and that's another example. A person walking in nature has better physical chemistry in doing that than when they're walking on a treadmill in a health club or something. The body knows. The body knows. The body knows that about the synergism that we have with the universe.
And I think we've gotten away from that. And there's probably a lot of reasons. And I know for the breathing, it's actually, I think one of the ways I learned it was from Navy SEALs. So Navy SEALs do box breathing, and it's designed to calm down their nervous system so that when they go into combat, they're perfectly calm. So this does have practical real world applications. As far as our meaning, I think never in history have we been bombarded by so many messages. And we've talked about sales, and the entire purpose of sales is done wrong, is to make you feel inferior, make you feel like you have a problem. And the same thing happens even with drugs for depression. I mean, the industry pushes you to feel bad and say that, hey, you've got a problem. And the answer to that problem is to give us money and we have your solution and you'll be great afterwards. The solution doesn't work. And if you've got 1 million people all day trying to make you feel bad about a million different topics, I mean, just look at every advertisement. It's every single one has the same underlying concepts. And if you study copywriting, they literally learn to use your words against you. It's no wonder we feel like we're not enough. And the easiest way to solve that problem is to turn off your phone, right? Turn off the internet, turn off the TV, go out into nature, chop some wood, build a fire, enjoy a little bit of peace and quiet, and the ability to kind of sit still, because all of these things are connected. And in this hustle bustle life, I don't think enough people do that, is to take the time to just be within themselves and to feel the world in a sense. It's as you're talking about, we're stuck in our mind. We're not in our body. And we have tremendous power within our body that I think we've forgotten that we can do. And little by little, people are discovering it. So someone figured out how to run a 4-minute mile. There is a tribe, I'm not sure if it's in Africa or South America, where they run 100 miles with no food, and they do it as kids, as adults, and as senior citizens. And it's no big deal for them. They have the physical stamina to just go do that. I think we've forgotten how to be in our body and how to use it appropriately. I know the training system that I use, the guys I follow, they can do handstands, which is cool. but they can stop at any portion of the handstand. So they can stop at 45-degree angle to being in the handstand because they've gone out, and literally the entire thing is the way you train for that is to go back to moving like an animal, because at the end of the day, we are animals, right?
All these changes you just described have been in the last 100 years. It's not like evolutionarily we're going to catch up with it, the body.
So it's going backwards, not forwards, in a sense.
The last 2 years, the life expectancy in America has gone down.
And that's surprising because everyone's saying a child born today can easily live past 100. But I think it's more because medical science is going to fix it, not because we're living healthy, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure how we'll live. And our biggest issue today is degenerative diseases, type 2 diabetes. We have all these lupus, autism, all these other things that really have to do with energy in the body. There's a Dr. Cowan that wrote a remarkable book, and he's one you got to interview. He wrote the book Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. And it's a relationship between energies in our body in the outside world through the molecule of water, which isn't a simple molecule at all. It's a phenomenal molecule.
So let's dig into this. And just for a baseline for everyone. So all our brain signals are electrical activity, right? That's how they're measured. Our heart is an electrical system. That's why you get a pacemaker, to send the electrical system that causes the heart to beat. Our entire body is working on this electrical system, and you kind of talked about energy, and I relate it to that. And we've chatted about this book. I think everyone thinks the heart's job is to pump blood throughout the body, but it seems that it's much more deeper than that. So I'd love to hear you share what you kind of learned on that.
Well, there's a Dr. Pollack, Pallack, I think. And he has brilliant studies on water and its complexities. Everyone thinks it's a simple thing. It is a phenomenally complex thing because of energy. And he found out that there's exclusion zones that create the surface tension of water so that if you see it hit your windshield, it bubbles up, it holds, right? It bubbles up and holds. So he was curious about that. See, it's the curious people that are asking the questions that make the difference. And Dr. Cowan was the same. He was doing an angiogram on somebody, and he was watching the arch of the aorta. Now, this is where the aorta comes out of the heart and takes a bend and then goes down through the rest of your body and then divides out so you get down to the little toes, right? All this to exchange something, I will just say something at first, in the capillaries, in the arterioles, and in the venules of the body to exchange energies, right? So he was watching this angiogram, and if if you have a garden hose and it's sort of kinked up, you turn on the water and it takes the curves out of it, right? He realized that what he was watching was the exact opposite thing. When you were in systole, when it closed down that left chamber to push things out, blood out, down to your the rest of your body, in that systole, either one of them, when it contracts, it's not just a pump. It is a energy speed train. And the reason he saw this is that because it's a hose, that aorta, and it comes down like that, it should expand like that with every contraction of your heart and push out a little bit because it's pushing up from there. Instead, he saw the arch coming in and that angle becoming more acute. And he said, what's going on here? And he realized it was a sucking action pulling that hose tighter at that curve. So it meant that there was something more than the mechanical contraction of the heart that was sending all this energy around the body. And it was doing it, if you think of all, it's almost like trying to force marbles through a hose because you have all these different materials in the blood, red blood cells, white blood cells, proteins, lipids, all this sort of stuff. So he couldn't figure it out. So then he read Pollack's work on water, and he realized that Pollack is saying, look, the inside of an artery is I think that's the positive polarity, and the outside or exclusion zone of water is a negative one. So you got a speed train. It's actually pulling down to the smallest capillary. You have this action of negative positive. It's energy. And then he points out, he says, look, if your girlfriend loses you, I mean, just walks away from you, you say, whoa, she broke my brain. You don't say that. She broke my heart, right? And we see in all the ancient scriptures and everything else, change your heart. Change your heart. And this connection, this mind-heart connection is so complex, and it has to do so much with energy. And that's what Cowan expresses in the book. It's far more complex than what we understand. So a lot of our cardiovascular problems and everything else has to do with attitude and the energy that attitude creates in your body, either positive or negative. If you weaken that energy, you're going to weaken areas in your heart. And he points out the heart is just not this pump. And coronaries are not just this blockage somewhere, because there's a lot of collateral circulation. There's an energy health to the heart. And that's why, how many times have you, oh my gosh, what does a person do? They put their hand right on their chest. I can't believe that happened, or something like that. We know it innately, but we have been so driven away from sensing the energies of our body when we walk, when we move, when we make love, and all these other things. We just aren't as sensitive to that. Even the fact that if you start to understand breath, there are times when you utilize it, and there are also times that you're very conscious of your breath, and it changes your whole attitude and energy. It's really just like you said with the SEALs. And I've been in the military in some dangerous situations, and breath control is really important. I do martial arts. I have for 40 years. And again, breath control and understanding how the energies flow in your body is very important to be able to react.
And this probably explains why we have billions of dollars in pharmaceutical drugs to treat heart conditions and diabetes, and we're getting nowhere. We're
getting nowhere. If you take a look at the mortality, as a matter of fact, even with statins, they say, oh, it's a problem of lipids. Well, it's not a problem of lipids. If you look at that study, it's called relative risk rather than actual risk. So it's an inferential statistic voodoo. But we sell $59 billion in statins, and yet one can change their diet, change their lifestyles, change their attitude, and their longevity will be better than just going on statins and living the way you are. So it's really my understanding over these last 3 years. I've been doing research in the complexities of sort of like a biocentrism, how is biology centered to all the other things that we have, those trees around us, those plants in our house and everything else. And it comes from, we already have the equipment to heal ourselves, and it's within us. There's a Bruce Lipton who wrote the book, The Biology of Belief. And I love that book because he was one of the first STEM cell biologist, and he started to realize, wait a minute, we're not just determined by our genes at all. And I'm helping with some genetic studies now on tendencies for opioid addiction. And Dr. Kerry Donaldson's doing brilliant work in this area. But there's such a thing as an epigenome, and there's such a thing as an environment. When they make stem cells, they take the stem cell and they put them in these different environments. And they'll change this environment, and this will be bone. This one will be lung. This one. They're just changing environment. The DNA in all three of those stem cells is the same. They're changing the environment. It's your environment and the way you see life and the way you have an attitude towards life, which can greatly change the energy in your body. Even healing yourself, visualizing areas where you have a physical issue. And when you're meditating, just driving energy to those areas mentally. I think we have everything we need endogenously inside us. I mean, the first drug pusher, if you believe in God, was God, because he made dopamine, he made endorphins, he made, adrenaline, all the things that keep us alive to be able to help us to nurture and create. He already gave us inside. The reason we need them from the outside is because we can't recognize it in the inside. There's enough there, and you can increase it and decrease it as much as you need to through creativity, through service, through all these other things that give us meaning in life. We're meant to be creators. We're not meant to be consumers.
And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that everyone lives siloed lives. And when I look at companies, they all live in silos, and they don't realize, what you do over here has a result over there. And the same thing is true with our life. If we behave or we take actions in one part of our life, they have ripples in every other part of our life. But nobody ever seems to realize that that's the case. And I've heard the same thing kind of even when it comes to racing. They're like, oh, that racer crashed in turn 9. But the expert says, well, he crashed in turn 9 because he did this in turn 8. And he did that in turn 8 because of this in turn 7. And this little mistake in turn 6 is what caused that chain reaction. So the little things we do here can have dramatic effects later on. And it's the same concept of the butterfly effect. A butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can essentially set off a tsunami in another part of the world. So people think I'm maybe a little crazy here, but if you go back to the domino theory, and I think we've talked about this, if you can get a big enough domino to knock over the next domino, that domino can knock over a domino that's 50% bigger, which can knock over a domino that's 50% bigger. Compounding goes massively crazy with this. So even the smallest actions can set in motion larger and larger reactions. It's not a one-step process, but it is, hey, we did this action here, which dominoes through our lives. So let's go back to basics. Let's start with how we consume energy, which is essentially food. And I'd love for you to kind of touch on the microbiome, what you've seen from all of your examinations, what the thought process is now and how that works, and how do we better fuel ourselves?
Well, I'm not a physician, but I take apart about 200 humans a year. And I do that with a brilliant forensic pathologist. And what we're seeing now, of course, the human body, in the 1800s, we ate probably a pound and a half of refined sugar. Now it's about 150 pounds. Well, it's not a very long time. The body can't adapt to that. And so, obviously, there are people killing themselves by eating processed foods. And processed foods are dominant part of the market. If you go to a grocery store, all the center is processed foods. And then you go around the outside, there's the butcher, the fisherman, and the vegetable guy. But most of the stuff is processed foods. And now it is convenient, but the processing over the years, again, has affected the energy within the body. Right now, we're seeing an explosion of fatty liver disease in young people. And it's not related to alcohol sometimes, but this is not an alcohol issue. This is an issue of how people eat, the fats they eat, the amount of sugar they eat. It has to do with insulin resistance and glycogenesis and all these complex, again, problems in the body. And so they're out-of-the-box thinkers. We've gone through a process in both medicine and agriculture where we look for solutions on the outside. So we want to find a molecule or a seed so that we can put Roundup on corn and keep the weeds down, but the corn's fine, although it has some residue in it, And so we genetically modify things and we tweak them, right? But there's a price to be paid for that. And then why is that done? Well, it's done because if you tweak something, you can patent it. If you can patent it, you can monetize it. And if you monetize it, you can control a market. And so today we have patented seeds. Farmers can't even regrow by saving seeds because they'll be put in jail because that's a patented product. And this happened in India. And there used to be over 80 varieties of cotton, and now we're down to about 4 or 5. And it's because large agriculture is coming in and using products like Roundup and modified seeds. And the end result there is they've lost hundreds of different species of plants, which used to be synergistic with each other. And farmers are paying patent fees on the seeds, and between 300 and 400,000 farmers each year commit suicide because they can't pay the patent fees and they can't use old seed.
Again, it all goes together. And even though you're saying processed food, I don't think people realize how processed the meat is we eat and what's going on in the way that they're feeding the animals. So I'd love for you to touch on that.
Well, it's feeding them and killing them. If you take an old guy that hunts deer, one of the old boys, and they hang that deer up and they're going to butcher it now because this is how you sustain yourself. And they butcher it and they take that meat and of course, they first got it because of contamination. But now the meat's there. That's pretty much pure protein. Why do they let it hang for 24 hours? And this one old boy explained it to me. So he's butchering this deer, and I said, well, why do you let it hang for 24 hours? He said, Graham, if you were shot and you had an arrow in your body and you were running from this guy, he had to track you down, you'd have all this adrenaline in your system, you'd have lactic acid and everything else going on. He said, that contaminates the meat. Fear and everything is in that meat. He says, so you have to wait 24 hours as it goes into rigor and comes out of rigor and everything else so that you can have those chemicals within the body disperse, your fight and flight chemicals. And he says, if you don't do that, the meat is not really that good for you. And he was an old boy. And it was absolutely right. But you take agricultural or mass farming today, probably the most unhealthy meat, I think, is chicken. because it's just not, it's not done well. And even when they say free range, that means there's 3 windows in one of those 22-mile chicken coops, and they have a foot to move in. You know, there's a big difference. Now, we're sitting on a farm where we have chickens running around on the other side, and the eggs, they get, and even if we have problems with the chickens running outside, which we did with red-tailed hawks. So again, synergism. Tommy, who raises the chickens here, he said, well, what can I do? And he noticed that crows and hawks fight quite a bit. And crows are very territorial. So he looked up what foods do crows like. And now he increased the crow population about a quarter of a mile over here. And so the red-tailed hawks are over here away from the chicken. So he didn't even need to shoot or kill a hawk, because they're great hunters too. They're beautiful birds. He just worked with nature to do it. It takes more patience than everything else, but it's a beautiful thing to see. It's a beautiful thing to see because the chickens are out there now. They're not being swooped up, and the hawks are just sitting, or not, the crows are sitting in the trees and waiting for their food, that sort of thing. So it's that cooperation with nature, which I think just brings us closer to everything. Our happiness always is endogenous. I don't care how many drugs you take, how many anxiety drugs and benzodiazepines, anything else. It will not make you happy. It treats a symptom, but it's not going to balance it. You have to balance your own life.
And that you do. And that requires time. And that's why I spend the first 2 hours a day getting ready for life, not off running around. It's the breathing, it's the quietness, it's the cold showers, it's all of these different things, along with reading and reflecting and having the gratitude, and also just kind of priming your mind for an excellent day. And I think people worry, well, if I spend that much time, how am I going to get anything done? Most people don't get anything done. They sit there stuck, spinning their wheels instead of actually doing stuff. When you take the time to do that, then that is when you have the time to be super productive, to just crank out what it is you need to do in life and to get it done. And you also have the chance to think, is this even important? Do I really need to do this? Is it worthwhile, or am I just doing something mindlessly because I've never thought about it any other way? So I think that is a big, big part of life. As a business owner, you love what you do. It's why you started your business. However, the business of business causes you stress and anxiety and keeps you up late at night. Welcome to the club. Over 80% of business owners hate the business part of running a business. It doesn't have to be that way. No, you don't have to learn how to read complicated financial statements. We create systems that run in the background, and I implement the systems in conjunction with your bookkeeper and accountant, analyze the information, and bring you better questions on how to run your business. It's a lot less expensive than you think to have a service like this, and not having it is why so many business owners struggle with money. The outcome is you can focus on what you love in your business, knowing that your finances are in order. Your business becomes more valuable, and banks are standing in line to provide working capital. You get to sleep at night. Learn more by listening to episode 163 with Mike Michalowicz as we discuss the process, or go to profitcomesfirst.com. Want to cut to the chase? There's a link in the show notes for a 15-minute no-obligation call to see if this makes sense for you. Schedule now and get your business on a rock-solid foundation. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here, because we talked about sugar, we talked about these refined foods.
And oils are a big thing. All the different oils. The only oils we should be eating are ancestral oils, coconut oil, olive oil, flaxseed, those types of oils, avocado oil. But when we get into the canola oils and all the hydrogenated vegetable oils and everything like that, that's causing tremendous health problems. Phony sweeteners like aspartame, all those are bad for us. But they're also a market force.
They are a market force, and that's kind of where I was going next. Could you talk about the money in studies that talk about this is good, that's bad, and also how it prevents studies that are out there that would show the opposite?
Right. And that is my issue. And again, it's one that will be attacked in this documentary. Right now, we're reductionist. You said something. Oh, yes. It was about how the chain of action with the race car driver and how it's way back here at turn 6 or whatever. That's interesting because everything is interrelated, but to a reductionist in medicine, you say, oh, well, somebody has anxiety. Well, we're going to give them a benzo. So what does the benzo do? It might, in one way, take care of anxiety. Prozac's an example. There's a slightly higher increase of suicide with people on Prozac. So it might have taken care of the nervousness for a while, but there's something going on there where they consistently have a higher risk of taking their lives. And all you need to do is listen to any one of those advertisements on TV where they show these people who are not overweight or at least morbidly obese. They're all smiling. They're all happy. And for whatever drug it is, whether it's anxiety, obesity, sexual performance problems, whatever it is, they're all happy. And they're sitting in the bathtub together, holding their hands, with Cialis. And then at the end, they tell you about the blindness, the, occasional anal leakage and seeing Satan and all this. And they say it in such a beautiful, rhythmic way. You don't even think about it. You're thinking about the lady in the bathtub. It's really well done. But obviously, you're spending billions on that and that advertising and the pushing of these things. But it is this exogenous myth. You have to have it from within. And you're only treating the symptom that way. Now, I'm not, for instance, buprenorphine will help you get through detox if you've been on opioids. But the most successful ones I have seen with getting not maintained on a drug less dangerous than fentanyl or heroin, like buprenorphine or methadone, are those recovery centers that say, okay, we're going to get you through the next 7 days, and then you'll be detoxed enough that we can start the intensive work, which is going to last 2-3 years. Because you're shooting for a different thing. And that's my concern. MAT, medically assisted treatment, has its position and place in treatment. And not everybody's the same. But you better not change the paradigm from recovery from addiction to maintenance. And it seems like that is a powerful market force right there. And there's a big bureaucracy that builds with these market forces. And they're actually trying, in many cases, to say, well, people have to be on these drugs so that they don't take those drugs. And they shouldn't be taking any drugs. And one of my interviews was a lady who, buprenorphine is a good drug to help people get off of opioids. But she's been on them 8 years. She's been on it 8 years. So she's a functioning addict, essentially. But she said, well, I'm not on heroin or fentanyl. Well, yes, but have you tried to get down? They said, well, no, they said I shouldn't do that because I feel uncomfortable.
Thankfully, I'm on zero drugs, and I do my best to take no pills. And
Zero is good. That's amazing. There's very few people.
I didn't realize that. I guess that's probably why when I go to the doctor, they're like, "You're not on anything?" I'm like, "No." Why would I be on anything?
Yeah.
But I guess a lot of people are on different things. And I guess it's also the outlook. I was in that industry, so I know what they do and I know how it works. And there are better ways to do it. As a matter of fact, all of the drugs, I think, for cardiovascular and diabetes, the first line says, after diet and exercise. And the problem is nobody wants to fix their diet and nobody wants to exercise, but we're designed to move. If you let a machine sit there and not move, it gets rusty, it gets old. So we're no different. We have to move. And then it comes back to diet. And I think that's another problem is everyone has been sold a bill of goods on diet. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. There's not a single study to show that except the ones from the cereal manufacturers who funded them. Yes, if a kid doesn't eat lunch and dinner and you give him breakfast before he takes a test, sure, he'll do better because he didn't have any food, not that breakfast was the outcome there. Let's just touch base on that because I do intermittent fasting as well. I don't eat breakfast. I usually don't eat till lunch. And some days I'm busy. I don't eat till dinner. And I will work out without any food in my body. And I don't have any problems with it. It takes a while. It
actually helps.
It helps. So talk about that.
It's insulin resistance. We didn't just mystically have this disease come in, diabetes. It is because we have progressively moved away from what we're talking about, which is being in touch with your body and what your body should be eating, how it should be moving, how it should regenerate itself. And this is also interrelated with circadian clock, which is very important. The proper amount of sleep, going to bed at the right time, all these things, you just can't eliminate or take yourself out of the universe and adapt physically because it's not possible. It's too short a time. Maybe in 100 million years, we won't need sleep, but right now we do. And we're tied to the clock. Even a Dr. Jack Kruse, who is a neurologist and neurosurgeon, he wrote a book, and within that book, I was reading it. He was talking about low carbohydrate diets and natural foods and all this other stuff. And he said the other thing is the movement. And he said a third thing is watching the sunrise in the morning. And he did this because he's very good in quantum physics, and he talks about the different frequencies that have different effects on our mitochondria in the body. Well, the mitochondria are all these little engines in each cell. And he said, you're setting the mitochondria for the day. And he says, it's very important at night when you start to go to bed. We're surrounded by blue light, not red light. Red light's good for us. And that's why you look at the, and I thought that was silly when he said, well, go outside. And I'm like you, I get up early, I read some, then I do the yoga, I do the breathing, and I do kata and things like that. So I think, well, okay, he's a neurosurgeon, I'm not. So I go out there and I'm standing, I have my dog with me, and I'm standing, I'm looking at the rising sun and just breathing. I look down at my dog. He's looking at the rising sun. And then I looked over on actually that tree right over there, and there's a red-tailed hawk up there. He's facing the sun, and so is a squirrel. So it is a fact that red light frequency is, I think it's the beta wave of the brain, but it sets the mitochondria. And then at night, he mostly has fireplaces going in his house and candles, not LED lights, not any of that stuff. And he tries to stay away from the computer, but if he does, he uses the blue blocker glasses at night. So he says you'll have better sleep, you're healthier, and you're more in sync with the circadian clock. And it's the basis for energy within the body. Now, you're not going to get a study on that. But and I just started actually a 501c3 called Coroner Cares. And I want to fund studies that can't be patentable, that can't be monetized, like breathing. I want to go in to a recovery center and I want to do some of the Wim Hof method. See if it doesn't make a difference. Can they, when they feel they need dopamine in their system, can they compensate with it by just moving around in that brain and saying, I can produce my own dopamine. So we'll see how that works. That's called comparative therapeutic analysis. That's not where you're monetizing something or taking a pill and comparing it to a placebo, but where you're saying, let's try this. Just like that curious doctor that said, why is that arch widening? Why isn't it widening? Why is it contracting? Or Pollack's preoccupation with surface tensions of water and finding out that the polarities move around in there. It's not that it is just, he calls it the exclusion zone. And more of his studies are going to teach us so much more about cleaning water, desalinization, all these other things. But he's doing it all on his own. He's not getting the funding he needs.
And unfortunately, the sun doesn't have an agent that can convince you to look at the sun every morning and get paid, right? Right. So no one's going to fund that study because A, they're not going to get paid. Right. And B, there's no product to sell because of it. And so it kind of creates that issue. So let's go back to the mitochondria, because I've heard some different things on this. It's my understanding the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, but they're not native to us. They're not really part of our DNA in our body. Or am I understanding that incorrectly?
Not native to us. I think that
more that it's a symbiotic relationship, that they're almost on their own.
Yes. They're an engine. They're an engine. They're not the driver. The driver is the DNA. But they provide the energy. And that is also affected by these complexities of positive and negative valences. And that's why light coming in through your eyes as that sun rises, or as we all wear clothes now, so we don't get exposure. Vitamin D3 is part of that action there, but we need the sun. But now, look, you don't let your kids go out without sunscreen on; they'll die. Look at the melanomas popping up on them.
And it's funny you say that, because I had heard that originally about sunglasses, that when you wear sunglasses, your pupils aren't going to dilate. And because they're not dilating, they're not signaling to set off, I guess, a melatonin reaction per se. So your body can't adjust because you're using something that's not natural, and you're preventing the body from adjusting to.
I don't use sunglasses a lot. That's part of the reason. I just think, well, it's just like if you're always in 70-degree weather, is that good for you? Is it good? Well, it might be good if you're down in Panama and you got great sun and great beaches and stuff like that. That actually looks sort of attracted to me right now. But you need these variances so your body, just like you said about the animal type movements. How many people over 40 can squat?
I can, and I can squat with my teenagers on my back. And that's the way we went to the bathroom before they created a toilet.
I have one of those potty things down there.
But I mean, because if you went to a third world country,
I have.
Many of them don't have European style, American style toilets. You squat.
Slit in the floor.
Yeah. That's how it works. And so you have to be able to do that all throughout your life.
Right.
Or you're in trouble. And they don't have those little grab bars for...
No. All the handicap bars and everything. So we're so safe, and we wear helmets when we're on anything yet nowadays. But part of that, one of the leading causes for people over 65 for accidental death is falls. And that's because of bad balance. Well, why do we have bad balance when you can take an aborigine that can run through the mountains? He's going after game. He can kill the game. You look at these guys, they're so ripped. They got like 7% body fat and everything else. And they have beautiful balance and ability to run. And we have people that have trouble making it through the mall, and it's because we've done that to our body. And I think we lose balance and all these other things simply because we're not doing the movements that we were made to do. And that's exactly what you were talking about.
It is. You've got to move and keep active. So you do see a lot of people at the end of their life. And besides the drug addiction problem, what are you seeing in the autopsies as major factors or surprising findings as to what's happened to their bodies?
Well, I think it's multiple morbidities. In other words, they all have multiple problems. It's very uncommon. It's very uncommon. If you were on the autopsy table and you don't have any meds in your system and you say you don't take meds, I'm going to start looking for the bullet hole, because I don't know why you died, because most of the people we have come through, I can see somebody in their 60s on 18, 20 drugs.
And they all interact with each other, and nobody's managing the interactions.
Nor do we ever study them. In other words, it's not like there is a person that Dr. Kerry Donaldson and I talked about that is actually trying to build algorithms so that before a doctor would, because they're only going to see you for about 7 or 8 minutes. This is corporate medicine. This is the way it's going to have to be. So they see you for 7 or 8 minutes. They don't ask you, how have you been feeling emotionally lately? Do you get out and move? Do you ever get out in the sun? How do you breathe? What do you eat? They never ask anything. It's still zero classes in nutrition for a standard MD.
Did you see Patch Adams? Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him, yeah.
He was in town. It's probably been 20 years ago. He came into town and talked. And as a doctor, his number one thing was, most people just need a hug.
Absolutely true. And it does change energy, by the way.
So continue on with the drugs. There's all these different drugs in the body. They're all interacting. We're not doing studies to say, and it's almost impossible to do them.
They cause all these different issues. So it's like medical doctors are really intelligent people. But it's like training a mechanic to be the very best mechanic. And then they say, well, what do we put in the engine, to make it go? And you say, oh, you can pee in it, or you could use gasoline, or you can use this, or you could put anything you want, milk in it, because that's about how stupid it is. We know everything about the body, the anatomy, maybe about at least 30% of the physiology. And yet we never ask, nor are they never ever trained, and nor do we really effectively compare different diets. Now, we were told that cholesterol is extremely important. That's what's killing us, because it's a fatty thing and it's going to clog up the arteries. And now we're finding out that it might be this relationship between energy, water, and valences of the endothelial cells and the exclusion zone of water that makes the heart function well or not well. And so what we're doing is just we're reductionists. We only look at it as a machine, but this isn't a machine. This is a cosmic wonder. And you have to relate that machine to everything you do, from the way you go to the bathroom, to the way you move, to the way you breathe, what you see, when you're exposed to the sun. All those things are very important because even the amount of time you have contact with the earth, Schumann's resonance, I think it's 8.75 megahertz, I think it is. The earth is a battery. Well, 100 years ago, even as a kid, I was barefoot all the time outside. And you don't see that today. So there's such a thing called grounding, where people actually ground themselves to the earth by walking around barefooted. And it was actually a student I had. He would go around barefoot all the time. I said, "Get some damn shoes on, boy." And he says, "No, I'm grounding." So I started to look this up and he was a brilliant student. And it was Schumann's resonance, and I found out there's some validity to that. So lo and behold, this neurologist is saying the same thing. He says, try to get out, walk barefoot on the ground. Now imagine just imagine a nursing home with an area where we know there's no stones and everything else, but people that have poor circulation, people that are always achy and everything else, rather than having them on Tylenol or Darvon or something like that for years, destroying their liver, just try it. Let's just try it. Let's take these old girls and guys and put them out there and have them walking through the grass and stuff in bare feet, and then doing movements while they're out there, and see how that changes them, and then see, wow, I can back them off of the 10 of the medicines they have. They have another 5 or 6 they'll be taking, but that's what we should be doing.
Maybe that's why everyone loves the beach, right? Because you're barefoot, you're out in the sun, you're not wearing clothes, you're in nature in a sense, and you're connecting with all of that. And we did have a senior care expert on the show at one time, and we talked about that. There's actually a study. They took people in their 70s and 80s, and they put them into a home that looked like when they were in their 50s. And they changed with all the reading material. So they essentially put them in a place where they pretended like they were 50. They made them go up and down the stairs. They made them do everything. And literally within a week to 2 weeks, these people regressed. And people who were on walkers were on canes, and canes to no longer, and they went backwards. So it's doing it. Number one, it's the mental attitude, and it works. You just have to go do it.
It wasn't exogenous. It wasn't taking something in. It wasn't some sort of an anxiety pill or anything else. I read that study. It was fascinating. It even had the magazines, the music of the younger age and everything. And it shows you what Bruce Lipton is saying, the same thing. And that is, change your environment, change your attitude, and you can change your life. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
And I have read that book, and I very much enjoyed it. So let's touch on a very touchy subject. Vaccines. There seems to be a lot of argument in this space, and I don't know that people realize this. If you are harmed by a vaccine, you're not allowed to sue the vaccine maker. You have to go through a government recovery system, and you have to prove your case to them, and they do pay out. So there are instances where they do pay out, but they have created such a legal loophole around them that it's difficult to get the truth. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on vaccines. And there are goods and bads to this. I'm not going to be that there's one right answer.
I think, again, we live in a more sterile environment, but we have more people that, like you say, have degenerative diseases. And now I had chickenpox and I had mumps and I lived, Now, the polio vaccine, I had friends that got polio when I was in Susquehanna Township High School. And I used to swim with them in a pool so they could start to try to get some movement. Polio vaccine it's still today, that's one of the main concerns of Rotary Club. I think they've spent $600 million on getting it into other countries. They're having trouble getting it into Muslim countries because they think it might be some sort of device to kill their population. But that's a powerful vaccine. So I think you have to have a cost-benefit analysis. But I also believe that, again, it goes monetized markets and that type of thing. Why do we have a pediatric protocol for the Hep C vaccine in the normal household? I can understand it if mom is a crack addict or something like that, you might have to protect the child. But it went from this was for adults to pediatric, a whole new market. And then it became a protocol. So your mother could be the most righteous woman in the world and your father the same thing. But they say, no, we got to put you on the pediatric protocol. So within I think it's the first 2 months of life or something like that, they're putting you on 3 vaccines. It's called the Hep C vaccine protocol. And there's not good studies on all of that. And I actually had 2 or 3 cases where I just kept on seeing on the 3rd dosage, these children got flu-like symptoms and they died. So I called the one pharmaceutical company and I said, I would like to know if you've done any studies or autopsies on children that are taking the vaccine and what are the artifacts of those that died? Was there something that I can look at in cells? And they said, we'll get back to you. Now, that was 18 years ago. They never got back to me. And at first they said, who the hell are you? And then there was just no reply. They wouldn't listen to me, so I had Dr. Ross, the forensic pathologist, make the same phone call, and we never got, somehow the helpline didn't work.
It is surprising, and I will say we did give our kids vaccines. We did not give our kids all the vaccines. We denied many vaccines until later in life. So day one, they're like, we're going to give your kid this vaccine. I'm like, no, you're not. And we would fight with the nurses and the doctors. And I would say, well, what are the reasons to give this vaccine? Well, XYZ. I go, we don't have XYZ. We're ABC over here, right? We don't have any risk factors. So I don't need this vaccine at birth or at 3 months. The second thing we did, we never gave 2 vaccines at once. Every vaccine was single dose. You will do 1 shot. And we did it on our schedule. So I wanted my kids to be old enough that should they react to a vaccine, they would be able to tell us something was wrong. And my daughter especially reacts to vaccines. Even the standard ones, she gets more of a reaction to them. So I'm just glad they have a stronger immune system going into it. The whole reason that the system is built the way it is of 0 to 5 is because they know that most parents after the age of 5 don't normally or routinely take the kids to the pediatrician. So they can't necessarily get all the doses. And, if you're a company selling $1 billion in a vaccine and you miss half your doses, well, there's $500 million in sales. So they ensure that the government tells you that you have to do things this way. It's not because it's right. It's because it's expedient.
Nor did they call you up. In other words, who does the government listen to? The government listens to lobbyists.
Correct. And when you go in there, the first thing they do is your son's going to get this vaccine. Then they hand you a paper and they go, sign this and waive away all your rights.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
Well, just recently, I had cut my hand on a broken dish. And so I went into one of these urgent care places. I got sewn up. And he says, well, we're going to put you, I won't name the antibiotic, but he said, we're going to put you on this antibiotic. Well, I had cleaned the wound. It drained out really well. I mean, it was spurting. So I took the script. Of course, I didn't fill it out, So a week and a half, 2 weeks later, I go back in and he says, oh, that looks good. He said, did you take all the antibiotic? I said, I never filled out the script. And he laughed. Now, this is the physician, and he's laughing. He says, I wouldn't have taken it either.
And they can't say that, can they?
No, because he said, but I have to tell you that because that's the protocol here. And if I don't do that protocol and someone out there gets infected, we get sued, I get gone.
And and the chances the infection are probably not because of the cut, because of something else. And yet this is what happens. And so, but then that comes back to the second thing is when our kids were young, we refused to give them antibiotics for 3 days. For the most part, if you're sick, the first 3 days, you don't get an antibiotic.
Fever's a good thing.
Fever is a good thing, right? So your body can, and that was my attitude, your body can regulate itself. The child will heal. Granted, there are times where we need to interfere, but for the most part, we don't. And in talking to the doctors, it was the same thing. If a mother brings in a sick child to me and I don't hand her a script, the mother thinks I didn't do anything and she goes and finds another doctor. So now we're back to money. We're back to money and lawsuits and in this whole thing. But you're also building up antibiotic resistance. You're killing the easy to kill bugs. And you're letting the ones that can survive multiply. And now you've got bigger problems and you're also messing up your entire biome. And so now you've got a whole digestive problem.
Well, we live in these sterile environments and our children we used to play out in the dirt and everything else. So we were exposed and built up antigens and an immune system. And plus, it's just, one thing adds on another. It's just like you said with the race car driver. If the diet isn't good, and many kids are on horrible diets, very high in carbohydrates and processed sugars. I actually was this guy had a stroke, and he was a great drummer. So, and my wife knew him because she's a singer, and we went in to say hi to him. And I looked at what was on his hospital tray, and there were Oreos there, all this stuff. And it just drove me nuts, because if we get back to unprocessed food, if we get back to ancestral fats, if we get back to high quality protein, and that here again, because exactly what you said, protein that doesn't have antibiotics, growth hormones in it, has been righteously raised and killed. And that is such a thing, because we've known that for about 100,000 years, and now it's only in the last 100 or so that we're not doing that. But we'll probably put a spring calf out here, and it'll be all grass fed. It'll have a good life, and then we'll have to butcher it And Ezzy will cry and say, "How could you?" And I said, "Well, see, there's a freezer over there, and that's what I'm going for." But the fact of the matter is, it'll all be humane, and the existence of that calf will be humane. And they won't be fed a bunch of grain that then causes you to need antibiotics in there because you cause infection in their body. You've destroyed a bowel. You destroyed their microbiome.
It's amazing how it's all tied together. Last topic is cancer. Just your thoughts of maybe what causes it. Is it preventable? What have you seen?
It's interesting. I have done some study on what is called the Gerson. Yeah, are you familiar with Gerson? There was a Dr. Gerson in the 50s, and his Gerson method had a high recovery rate with all different types of cancer. And what they did was Gerson understood that cancer cells don't metabolize the way regular cells do. Regular cells need oxygen. Cancer cells need sugar. Their fermentation. That's how their growth goes. So what they do, and there's still a clinic down in Mexico, but the FBI shut him down here. And he was a German doctor. He had very meticulous records, and he was showing a success rate, but he wasn't using any chemotherapy or anything else. It was just diet. And if I were Rush Limbaugh with a stage 4 cancer, because I know what the outcomes are, and I want you to look at the mortality rates. So they're either going to shoot them full of chemo and then radiation, and all this stuff affect that tissue anyways. I would be down at the Gerson Institute, and I'd be, they are juicing, and it's mostly vegetables. They're very, the proteins would be proteins from beans and stuff like that. But the main thing is that the first part is just tremendous detox. And that goes on for about 1 or 2 months. But they've had very good results. And very good results with it. Again, they say, "Oh, that's poo-poo because you have to use science-based studies." Okay, tell me what a science-based study is. Well, we take these people and we give them chemo, and these people and we do nothing. And see, the chemo, they lived 4 months longer. Or they say they were cured of cancer. Their definition of cured, I think, is 4 months cancer-free. That's really not as scientific as they want it to sound. So why not study Gerson? The FBI took Gerson's records. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you deny other people? I mean, Trump's talking about a choice in having meds that haven't been cleared by the FDA if you're dying. Well, how about not having meds, but having the courtesy of allowing somebody to get reimbursement on a Gerson method, which you can't. You got to pay for that out of pocket.
So what does detox look like? What are they doing?
They have specific juicing, all vegetables. You go pure vegetarian at that point. And obviously, no alcohol because it metabolizes into sugar, and they're trying to keep your sugar metabolism down. So to some extent, it's, even though it's vegetarian, it's low carbohydrate. And no, you just don't even see that. I have been in chemo centers where you go up to the front and the information desk and stuff, and there's a candy dish there. There's a candy dish. Where's the logic on that?
One of the ways they find and look for cancer throughout your body is to give you a PET scan, which is basically looking for where's the glucose metabolism lighting up in your body.
Right.
And so if that's the case and you see that sugar's lighting it up, well, then it seems to make sense. Maybe we should stop the sugar. And it's funny because nobody talks about this. When you look at cancer and survival rates, number one is cutting it out. So surgery. Surgery has the highest cure rates. Chemo and radiation are very, very minimal as far as added benefit, but they sure do cost a lot.
I have a Dr. Chen that is working on cellular photogrammetry, which I believe, again, we're using core samples of tissue from the dead. And brilliant guy, both in IT and in medicine. But the concept there is to get a clearer idea of where a perimeter of the cancer is. And this is almost like having a CAT scan of what would normally be a slide. So you can look at this virtually up on a screen and say, well, here's the outer perimeter of this. Now it's wrapped around this vessel. It's phenomenal. And that's a ways down. That not because the technology isn't there, but the storage, the battery storage of the data isn't there. So if multiple, it couldn't, we couldn't store it right now, all the information that's coming out of those studies. So they have to work on the battery storage too, or whatever it's called out in the cloud. I don't know, but couldn't store it.
Is there anything that we should have talked about today did not get a chance?
I think, it's just my own opinion, I think there's a spiritual component to man. And it was Carl Jung called it psychic energy when he was talking as a psychiatrist. But they asked him once, do you believe in God? Because some people say you're metaphysical. He said, no, I don't believe in God. He said, I know God. And I love that because that's basically that. I couldn't take that walk without seeing that interaction between me and the trees and the dogs and the squirrels and everything else, and not know that it's all part of one big system, just like those mitochondria are part of the cell, and the cell's part of the tissue, and the tissue's part of the organ. It's otherwise it's Beebe right down here in Lehigh Valley was a professor that wrote, I think it's called Darwin's Box. And he was talking about the intricate machinery and complexity in a cell itself. It's so complex. I mean, there's augers and everything else in this thing, all made out of proteins and driven by valences. And that's almost like a caveman walking out of a cave, and he looks down and he sees a Rolex and he says, who made that? Because he's smart enough to know that can't happen by accident, right? And he knows who made that. So I think that component is there, and I think that is what drives us to be creative, and that drives us to serve. And if we do those two things, we're creative and we serve, I think we're happy. We're rich.
And I think that comes back to contribution, right?
Sure.
And in a sense, giving back, it's that contribution and it's growth. And those are the two, along with love, which is basically relationships. When you have great relationships, you serve, you give back, and you're growing as a person. If you can do those three things, you've got an amazing life.
That's true. You said it all begins with gratitude. And I was reading a bunch of what St. Ignatius of Loyola. And he says, all meditation begins with gratitude. And then I was reading from Prabhupada, who's Hindu. Says, all meditation begins with gratitude. You first have to realize that you don't deserve anything, and anything you do have, you should be grateful for, including life.
That's a perfect way for us to bring this part to a close. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Well, my secret, and it's just simply for me, love God, love people, change the world. That's it.
It sounds so simple. And yet it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Love God, love people, change the world. Because I was the kid that always touched the stove after you. All the other kids would say, well, she says it's hot. And I said, well, how hot? So I was sort of that way. And so I've learned from experience, but it all brought me back to what the fundamental truths are anyway. So it was a good thing.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Wow, that's good, because your prefrontal cortex isn't even developed that much. But respect the fact that you exist. If you look at the gift of life and you see it as a gift, you're less likely to waste it all.
And too many people, unfortunately, waste their life. And that is a shame.
Yeah.
If people would like to learn more about you, connect, check out your documentary and your other shows, what is the best place for them to do that?
Probably at grahamhetrick.com. And then that lists all the Twitter accounts and all that. So that can tell them when new shows are coming up. I know my daughter, who handles all this stuff, does a lot of Instagram stuff. So if you go to the grahamhetrick.com website, it'll have my Instagram and all that, which it's almost like the microwave. I don't know how to work it.
And we will put the link in the show notes to make it easy for everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's been fun.
As expected, that was an amazing conversation. I always enjoy speaking with Graham about different things. There was a time when doctors handed out placebos because they knew you didn't need a drug. They're no longer allowed to do that. My suggestion is to try some of the different things we chatted about and see if it makes a difference in your life. Most of it's free and it doesn't take much time. For this week's action step, how about examining the food, the fuel you put into your body? Is the food you eat real, or is it full of chemicals you can't even pronounce or know what they are? Also, what's being fed to the animals you eat? It's worth asking, and I think the reasons kids today have so many issues is because the fuel they are given. The reality is, life is not lived in silos. Everything we do and say has an effect on other parts of our lives. Our day starts with the morning and how we treat ourselves and the expectations we have for our day. What do you choose? Starting with appreciating instead of expectation sure makes the day go a whole lot better. Now more than ever, you need a plan for your life. If you want to bring about change, reach out to me and let's start with a conversation to see if we're a good fit for each other. It's Rocky at richersoul.com. If you're still listening, you must have liked the episode, so please share it with a few friends. It can start a great conversation, and I'd appreciate that. I'd also like to have you connect with me on the Facebook page or group for Richer Soul. Please stop by and say hi. Let me know how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.